thank you very much, first of all, for the invitation. I'm happy to be here today. And I will present some thoughts from the perspective of OpenAIRE and, of course, from a wider perspective, as I'm a project manager of many projects in Göttingen. We run services as well, of course, like we have a university press and repositories and support researchers in realizing open access. And on the other hand, we have projects like OpenAIRE and Foster, open up a bunch of projects which help us to innovate all the time and, improve our services. So OpenAIRE, as you will know, is an infrastructure project, and open science as such is the umbrella for all these activities. And this is just an abstract of a little article with, which is just saying it's just science. Open science is something we might not think about in a couple of years anymore because it's just good science. So with all the opportunities out there in terms of making, first of all, the resources more available and also making the process more transparent. So open science involves to, of course, starts for some fields with a crisis. In the sense of reproducibility crisis, for example, in psychology and so on, where they had a lot of issues in terms of looking into the results. And then there was actually, because the missing availability of access to data, then you cannot really reproduce what's going on. And this is actually what you would aim for, that the data is managed right from the beginning, and then you consider what to publish in terms of at least the data which is underlying your results. And there are, of course, many benefits, but there are also challenges like legal regulations, and of course the habits of researchers are an issue in the sense, of course, you say, first of all, it's mine, and then you might share gradually with your group or with some colleagues, and then you consider what's the next step and what you actually can share from a certain stage. And so it will never be like one or the other. It will always be a stepwise approach towards these actions in terms of opening up your research. So the European Commission's Open Science Agenda, there are 4 main points when it comes to results and research data. So first of all, open data in the sense of fair data management, which is not meaning immediately open and so on, but it's more the full fledged of saying, okay, you manage your data and then think of the step of sharing at some point. Then the European Open Science Cloud. I come to this towards the end of my presentation. And then there was an exercise of looking into alternative metrics, because there are these notorious metrics like the journal impact factor, where you know, okay, it's not really measuring the impact of an individual article. And even if you say, okay, maybe it's an estimate, then it's just a skewed estimate where you know many articles will never meet this threshold of the journal impact factor. Many may go uncited at all or have few sites. And then there is the future of scholarly publishing, where you have new things coming up. Preprints are getting more important. We hear about this later today, but also publishing platforms which are coming from funders. So recently there was a conference on the new presidency in Tallinn, where you always have this call for actions. A year ago there was a call for action in Amsterdam covering open science, and this time it was more looking into ensuring the investment of the European Commission, basically, because we are coming closer to FP8, and then you have to secure the amount, basically, and the main keywords were impact and excellence and openness. So this is the motto of the Framework 8 program, basically. So where are we in the development towards open access in the sense of a mandate? We have in FP7, okay, it was just 20% of the program. We had the special clause 39, which was in the grant agreements of selected research areas. And of course, as you know, it's basically a green mandate where you have to secure deposit in repositories of the final published article or the author manuscript. And there was, and is still, of course, in Horizon that you can use the project funds for paying article processing charges, open access fees. And there's guidelines also from the European Research Council where you have some endorsement of certain repositories, including for books. And in Horizon, now we know, okay, it's mandatory for publications, and in the early stage you had the pilot not covering all program areas, but since last year it's covering all areas, but there's some way of stepping out of the open data pilot, and I come to this later. So an open air is a two-strand activity. You have on the one hand a human network where we activate the community in the sense of we share knowledge and have kind of ambassadors in every European member state and beyond. And we have this digital network, which is an infrastructure on top of institutional infrastructure and disciplinary infrastructure. So it's bringing together the support and training side on the institutional level and the services as a layer on top of the infrastructure. And this is just an overview of the human infrastructure. We have this like regional management approach, north, south, east, and west. And in addition, we have activities in other parts of the world. So the Confederation of Open Access Repositories, which is mentioned there, is an international organization which is reaching out to Latin America, where they have a similar activity in the sense they network repositories for the region and also look into, what's the way of how to presenting this as an overarching output for the region. So, and infrastructure-wise, it's starting, of course, with information which comes from data providers, which includes repositories, open access journals, also harvesting from the directory of open access journals, and from CRIS systems, and a couple of other bibliographic information, and then you have to infer links between these entities, of course. So in the core, you have a kind of European research information system where you can navigate from projects, or better, you can start from institutions and navigate to what projects this institution holds, and then you can go from projects to what is the outcomes in terms of publications and research data, and where possible, we try to infer these links between the publications and data. So you get an overview of what's actually happening on the level of funded projects. We're not only covering the EU projects, but work with other funders as well. So it's national funders, but also Wellcome Trust, where you can also navigate through these projects and have a look what's happening. And then you have, on the one hand, of course, this type of reporting and statistics, but of course it's also meant as a discovery tool. And then you can say, okay, how well are we performing in this sense? So overall, it's about 22 million publications, which are there in terms of records. We don't have the content. We only have the records in terms of metadata, of course, and data sets, over 500,000, and about 500,000 is linked to projects from a dozen funders. And we have over 2,500 data sources. So as a reminder, in open access mandate, there is of course this paragraph 29.2, where you, as a researcher, are said to, you have to deposit a machine-readable copy of the published version or final peer-reviewed manuscript, and it has to be deposited within 6 or 12 months, depending on the research area, and there has to be an acknowledgement. Otherwise, you cannot really say what is the project this belongs to. So from the infrastructure perspective, of course, this means that in the repositories there has to be a metadata field which actually holds this information in terms of this is the project identifier, which is the number, the grant agreement number. And then we also need to know what is the access status. Is this open access or is this embargoed? And if there's an embargo, then you need to know the embargo. And otherwise, it's very difficult to figure out what is the type in terms of access of this publication. So you will see later, I mean, there is, of course, sometimes an issue when you collect this information, the meta information, to figure out what's actually the access status. So in terms of the activities, this is the overview in the sense of where a researcher starts, and then he or she makes the decision in terms of I go for an open access journal immediately, or I go with the traditional journal, which is a subscription journal, and then you have to figure out how in the end can I deposit this in a repository. With the open access journals, it's typically, of course, an activity of librarians harvesting this type of information and putting it into the local infrastructure. But with the others, it's more difficult, I mean, to figure out in terms of is there an embargo, what is the right situation in terms of what does the publisher allow, or are they actually willing to spend some money in terms of the hybrid open access, which can be quite cost intensive in the sense of you pay per article a quite substantial amount, and then this might sum up to a couple of thousands within a project, and you have to consider, do we have this budget, or might it, I mean, in general, it's better to go for a combined strategy, of course, that you say, okay, what's the embargo, and if it's short enough, go for the deposit with after the traditional publication, if they really want to stay with this type of journal. So this is a view on an institution. So you find tables there in the sense of the outcomes in terms of publications on the right of this app box, and also how many projects are there in terms of, these are both the FP7 and the Horizon 2020 projects. And then you can navigate through the list of funded projects. So for example, I looked at this one, and then you have a statistics there, so it's little functionalities down there. So this is a project, so the green is not open access, this is actually the one where we don't know what's the access status is. The blue is the open access, so it's not as good as you would hope. It's just less than a quarter of open access availability, but there are, of course, also projects where you have 100% open access. So it's really a range of activity on the level of projects, what effort they put, and on average, it was for this for the ESPCI, where it was for Horizon was about 41% open access share, and in FP7 it's better. It's more in the range of 2/3. But this is rather typical. So in Horizon, I mean, for now you might have not a complete overview, because I mean, it's of course often with some delay that people deposit publications, but also when these publications appear, you might not always know what's the access status. So what we have, this blue section there is the unknown part, where we don't know what the access type is, and then it's currently about also 2/3 of open access share, and not so many embargoed, but likely the unknown is the embargoed part, or the closed part. And of course, you have through this FP7 post-grant, which we actually prolonged for a couple of months, so there's still money out there for researchers. Within 2 years after the end of the project, they can apply for funds for article processing charges. Please check it out. I mean, there's always, when you, as a librarian, you can register, and then you see all projects which are of relevance to you, and you can see if they're eligible. So you can actually contact these projects on this basis. So please have a look and send them an alert if there's still something in the pipeline. It really has to be that you register before before the paper comes out. Otherwise, it's too late for asking for these monies. So, and in FP7, every couple of times, every few months when I look, it's still increasing. So the share is growing. So it's now about 2/3 of open access. And I mean, at the end of FP7, it was maybe, yeah, more in the range 40–50% or something. So it's growing because of the later deposits. And also because of these post-publications which come out, and then they might use these FP7 post-grants. So we have a slightly higher share of open access even in the publication, in the projects which had the special clause 39. So it's 74%, and ERC projects have 71% open access share. And overall, there were about 15 publications per project, and on average, yeah, it's 98% come out within 4 years after project end, which is of course due to these delays in terms of sometimes the review takes a year, or might even take 2 years before a publication appears after submission. So challenges. They will stay with us for a long time, likely. I mean, in the sense of you have these legal restrictions from the publisher side that also still transfer exclusive rights, and then you end up with what the publisher allows. Yeah, you have still, of course, researchers which say, okay, there is not so much in my field in terms of high-quality open access journals. I would like to stay with the traditional ones. And publication costs can, in that sense, of course, be quite high if you go with the traditional journals, and then you have the hybrid choice only if you want to publish in open access. And yeah, in many countries, including Germany, there are still these negotiations with publishers in terms of we would like to have a new deal in terms of not just subscriptions, but a deal which is covering open access publishing as well. And with some publishers, there is a bit of willingness now, but certainly not, yeah, with the large ones immediately. So, you know, there's this conflict with Elsevier, of course. And as a baseline, we still have to go for this open access deposit in repositories. And I'm aware that you also have this clause in your copyright law, which was adopted last year. It's a topic later on in this event as well. I mean, we have this in place as well, but of course this also comes with some complications in terms of, well, it's a national law, and then you might say, okay, maybe only the national publishers, and then you have, yeah, quite some restrictions to discuss.
Article 30,
yeah.
Not 1730. 17 was the project, and now in the law it's Article 30.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so different numbers. So another things coming up are things like these funder commission platforms. So Wellcome Trust stepped into a collaboration with Faculty 1000, where researchers can publish open access based on a reasonable fee, and they organize the peer review as well. And you have this sometimes in this type of events that people ask, why is the funder not coming up with such a platform? And the Commission is now also preparing a tender call in this direction. So there will be a call, and we'll see what happens. So I move on to research data now. So the motto is actually not open it up as such immediately, but it's as open as possible, as close as necessary. And you could say, on the one hand, I mean, one reason is, of course, okay, I comply with what the funder says. I mean, they expect it. But on the other hand, there are many other reasons why researchers might consider. I mean, we ran a survey some time ago with the global environmental change community. It's a paper I published with some colleagues. And from the reasons we offered in this survey, First of all, it was like accelerating research, and the general good basically is on top of the reasons why they, support open data. And then comes very personal reasons, of course. Very close to your own research, which is disseminating and recognition of your own work, a personal commitment to open data, and requests from others, from other researchers. And then comes the policies, and on top is the funder policy, and then comes the scientific profession, and then comes the institution, and at the very bottom comes the publisher policy, which plays a role for some fields in a stronger sense. But it's good to see that the funder is highest, then comes the institution, and of course it's close to the heart of your own, to display your own achievements. And this side over there is, from Rufus Pollock, which was the chairperson of the Open Knowledge Foundation some time ago, and he said, the best thing to do with your research data will be sought out by someone else. So, but this might not be enough from your own perspective to say, okay, I give it to the world, but so there are different strands of arguments. So what is fair data management about, which is the underlying guidance for researchers in the European Commission's policy? So first of all, there are some activities to make data findable, also accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So it's of course about describing the data, adding metadata, additional information on what's actually in there in terms of what the actual variables are about, and also, of course, to check with the infrastructure, is it interoperable, and offering this information in a way which is adhering to standards. And for reusability, of course, the licensing part is important in the sense of what do you allow others to do with the data. So the data in question is, first of all, the data which is underlying publication. So it's not saying you have to share everything immediately. And they can specify all this in the data management plan. So projects which stay in the pilot have to come up with a deliverable after 6 months, which is then specifying all this information about their data. And of course, they can say why, for some reason, they don't publish a certain part of their data. So it's always possible to say, okay, for this or that reason, I don't. And for opting out, there's a long list of ways of getting out of the data pilot. But I think it's better to advise in the sense of stay in and figure out at a later stage, in the sense of it's worth the exercise because you have to manage your data anyway, and your data management plan might be of assistance of really to think about it and discuss it within the group and come up with a policy on what to share with whom, at what stage, and what are the actions what is actually done with the data. So the Commission also figured out in the early stages of this pilot what was actually happening in terms of in and out. I mean, there were about 2/3 stayed in the pilot, about 18% opted out, but this was at the proposal stage. So at the funded project stage, it was about 1/3 which opted out, but there were also funded projects which opted in. So on this basis, they then went to make it to make it mandatory for all projects. So when you develop within a project, it's a 4-step process. You start with developing a data management plan, and then comes the stage of depositing the data. And of course, the underlying principle is that these data should be accessible for mining and reproducing and disseminating the data, and also to provide information of what tools have been used in collecting this data. So there's advice in the proposal writing stage where you say, okay, you put something in the impact section. There, of course, does not have to be a data management plan, but some question has to be answered. Similar with the impact section on publications in project proposals, where you elaborate on what will be done in terms of open access, but you also elaborate on what's planned for data management. And then at a later stage, projects can use a template, which is provided by the Digital Curation Center. They have this tool, DMP Online. There's a template for the EC projects as well, so fleshing out the information. So, and one thing, of course, is to be specified is the license, and the recommended licenses are either Creative Commons CC BY or CC0. So CC0 is actually the better choice because it's not restricting, and you still can say, please cite my data. So it's of course the good practice in research is that you not necessarily need a license to encourage your peers in terms of they should do the common thing. So, and then for data repositories, there's of course a similar infrastructure in terms of that there's a registry of data repositories, re3data, I'm sure you have come across, where you can look up data repositories. And as a catch-all repository, we run Zenodo in OpenAir, which is hosted by CERN. And I often, when I talk to young researchers, I tell them, try it out. It's very easy to use, and you can deposit your things there and decide at a later stage on how you publish your information. And you can also like submit a paper to a journal and register your data there. You have a DOI immediately, so it's really helpful in the sense of a first try, and then you might say, okay, maybe I go for a disciplinary repository if I really want to make the effort, because this is of course a little less effort in terms of what you have to provide in terms of description, and so other repositories might have, of course, a more comprehensive metadata. So this is just, and yeah, from the activities, of course, it's enabling discovery goes a lot through to metadata and vocabularies. So this is just as a background information, and enabling reuse. I mean, you still have this phenomenon that people dump their data in a PDF, so better give them some basic advice on terms of use formats which are actually enabling reuse. So, and information about tools is often needed, that you say, okay, I work with specific tool when collecting and processing the data, and at some point you might be brave enough to say, okay, I put my code online as well. So, say on Zenodo or with the journal. So from that I move on. I mean, all these tools and this data, they come together in this vision of the European Open Science Cloud, which is basically, it's a work area vision where you say, okay, as a researcher, you are in an environment where the services come to you and you can work with your data and publications in one space, and these tools and services interlink, which is each other. Where the focus is, of course, slightly stronger on the research data, and you have a mixture of stakeholders which contribute, which is on the one hand infrastructure providers, service providers, and on the other, it's of course the policymakers, and you have to come up with some governance structure for such an exercise, because it's actually bringing together infrastructures which are already there. It's not like building up everything from scratch, but would like to bring this into, on the one hand, to, yeah?
Perhaps would it be possible to turn off the lights that are in the front row there, which keep the
maybe in the back. I don't know where to switch off the lights here. Maybe that's, yeah. So. Perfect. I have them switch off now. So it's very light. I'm sorry for the design they choose. So it's bringing together services, data, but as you can see, it's also targeting publications and training resources. And there will be some federated access in there as well, so not everything will be open. So it's bringing together different elements. But from the vision, I mean, I think it's very sensible to say it's really, first of all, it's an exercise where you have to discuss with the stakeholders, and that is actually what's actually now going on in the first stage of projects. So you have the European Open Science Cloud Pilot, who's first of all trying, to liaise with the stakeholders and come up with some governance framework. And they come up with some demonstrators where they had calls, also somewhere built in right into the project, where they say we want disciplinary demonstrators which showcase the value of such a European Open Science Cloud. So they have quite a few from the life sciences, but also have, which is not listed here, they also have something from the humanities where Daria and other humanities social sciences projects are involved. So as my final slide, there's of course lots of work to do still. I mean, in the sense of stepping up the skills on the side of on our side, infrastructure and library and archive side, and also on the side of researchers. Of course, they also, when you talk to young researchers, they say, okay, some of them are very able to do these things and they figure out themselves. So they say, okay, I work on GitHub anyway, and I figured out how to deposit this in Zenodo. But the others are, of course, less brave in the sense of trying out all these new tools and services. And and then of course this has to be matched with incentives in the sense of you do all these things, but is it rewarded? I mean, in the sense, is there a lot going on in terms of in the hiring processes? It's now happening occasionally that they say, okay, we want the researcher to demonstrate also not just, I mean, of course, the excellence and the achievements and the sense of publications, but also in the sense of what has this person done in terms of openness. The infrastructure part I covered, and for your reference, I added these resources. I mean, there were recent reports on the two topics I just mentioned. They were commissioned by the European Open Science Policy Platform on providing skills and competencies to researchers, and also on evaluation of careers, where they look into career stages. And then you have to think about how to implement these recommendations, of course. So, and fact sheets, we have produced some fact sheets of OpenAIRE. They're online available. I only brought a very few copies in print. So that's it from my side. And if you have any questions, please, now.
Yes, hi, Thierry Gallier. I will later on be talking about Thierry Gallier will later on be talking about preprints. Here, it's a question and a comment at the same time. I find the position of the European Commission in this matter, I'm afraid a bit not straightforward and bureaucratic and complicated for researchers. And this may not be surprising, but why not promoting preprints and going right away to, it's open access at the moment where you're ready to publish, rather than asking to do so many things and go through all these complications. More and more journals are then accepting articles that were already published as preprints. And if there is the only reason why I would see one would opt out open access is for patenting, commercial use, etc. But this has to be sold anyway before you send your manuscript to a regular old-style publisher. So I think if we were to go right away to preprints, we would solve all the issues at once, and that would be straightforward and simple for the researchers.
Yeah, I'm perfectly with you. So I mean, I think the general principle should be that there is a copy in a public infrastructure as early as possible. So, which is preprints, whatever version, or it could be called working paper, depending on the research area. And then everything comes out in sense of services, peer review, and so on. But it's from the researcher perspective, I think it's still a rather slow process in terms of that they say, okay, let's give it a try, and then I tell my peers about the good experience. I mean, like from chemistry or so on. I mean, there is reluctance still in terms of preprints. But I'm perfectly with you. There should be endorsement, first of all, of course, that they can mention them in the proposals. So this is something which is actually already citable. Nothing else can be there apart from real publications, but not the ones who are in your cupboard and you know what's actually there. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. So it's a lot of complications, and Europe should kind of impose the legitimate character of of depositing preprints, and no publisher would have the right to interfere. Yeah. Okay, another question, because there's still this. There was a statement in Amsterdam 2016 about open access, and that all science should be open accessibility. Then there was Tallinn 2017. But are there any concrete measures? I mean, there are all these statements, but there haven't been any concrete measures, because the big multinationals like Elsevier, Wiley, Springer, they go on with their impossible price increases, etc., etc. So what is Europe doing concretely instead of all these mega depositories? Because this is a mega repository.
Yes.
So, but we need legal action against monopolies like Elsevier, etc. So are there any concrete financial measures for allowing open access by 2020, which was a big thing in Amsterdam? Do you know about anything?
I'm not aware of any action. But I mean, I also agree with you. There should be something from the European Commission's I mean, for Europe as a whole to come up with such a legal framework in every country like we have now in France and Germany, but still it's not like overarching, because you always have these are national rules, and then you have to fight with the publisher if they accept the national rule.
The embargoes
Yeah,
are there,
and
all
yes, indeed.
All these things are just there to check, oh, do we have the right to put it here?
Yeah.
Because you have an embargo X, Y, Z, for each publisher different. So this is not a European situation.
No.
Yeah,
Unfortunate, very.
Yeah.
Yeah, could you please clarify what you mentioned? I'm here. I'm Marie Farge. Though about you said that European Open Science Cloud, they will not be everything open. So which will be the restriction to openness in that? I'm personally very much worrying that this cloud is, in fact, will bring a lot of support and money to many, I mean, more commercial companies who will use this international expertise to get the problem of open data advanced for them, even with financial support. And then they will just get stamina, and then they will close things that they want to close. So I need really to understand what, because you just say not everything will be open in EOSC. So what do you mean?
Well, I mean that as a researcher, of course, you will have access to your storage, and then you decide at some point what to share. I mean, in the sense of there will be infrastructures which are institutional level, and then you link up with national and international infrastructures, and the data and publication moves in this infrastructure, and the services are connected with these with these elements. But I mean, you know, storage does not mean it's necessarily completely open. But I mean, you work in an infrastructure which has the functionality of open, of course. But this does not mean that everyone can access everything, because it's your work environment. In that sense, I mean, it's not necessarily. I mean, as an infrastructure, of course, it's open. Everyone can join and can use the services. But when it comes to your data, you can store it there, and then you decide what you share and when. And I'm not sure. I mean, I don't think that there will be a lot of
I'm sorry. In this
commercial
case,
services in this infrastructure. It will mainly,
Yeah, but-
I would think, it's public infrastructure.
yes, but in this case, for me, it's not yet public. I mean, it's my data. I want to have it closed. This is, of course, my responsibility. But the day it's this European science cloud, I think the goal should be openness
Yes, of course,
to everyone.
the goal is openness.
And not open to a club of kind of a few companies who have just
No. I mean,
agreed
it's
to
not,
share
not
this.
about companies. I mean, it's,
Well, no, I have
yeah.
observed that. You see,
Okay.
I was among the people advising this last year at the European Commission, and I resigned because I observed that internal to the European Commission, there was groups of people who were manipulating this open science cloud project just open to their club. What does this mean? I give you just a very simple example. They wanted data from public hospitals to be put in this kind of data set in order companies can get access to public data, but it was only the companies who were part of the club.
Yeah.
And that's, then I say, no, I'm very sorry, this is not what I mean by open science. So we need to push that point and
of
make
course.
it clear.
Yes.
I have a lot of doubt about the basic policy underlying this project.
Yeah.
Yes,
We
I
have
have
to be careful.
I have another question. Is I hope so, but is the European Commission aware of the fact that both Nature Springer and Elsevier in the last year and last few months both bought startups who make electronic lab books? And so are they thinking at anything like an antitrust law in the field, or is it fine with the idea that they realize they not in the future they won't be controlling the end point, so they are now trying to control the starting point? So what is the thinking? I hope there is some thinking about that. Is there?
I've not talked about this with any one of the commission, but I mean, if you met Jean-Claude Burgelmann, I think he's very much aware of that there are challenges. I mean, in terms of
one step ahead of all of this.
Yeah.
They bought B-Press.
Yeah, B-Press and
They bought B-Press, which was kind of an open access.
yeah.
There is.
It's really a mixture of they buy repository and publishing infrastructure.
There is
information.
another point related
Yeah.
to that. Is that recently there is a group of experts that is constituted on the future of scholarly publishing and communication, and Birgit is member of this group of experts. And the members of the expert are on the website of the European Commission, and you can find that there are 6 members, 6 scholars, and among organizations, 6 organizations, you can find Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, eLife, Frontiers, leurs, so Elsevier, Springer Nature, and Wellcome Trust. And the mission of this group is to assess emerging and alternative open access business model with the aim of establishing how an economically viable transition towards open access can be achieved. And the task is to assist the Commission in the preparation of legislative proposals and policy initiatives. So, but Elsevier is in the group, and we assist the Commission to on the preparation of legislative proposals.
Yeah, so the original list was different, but then the Commission decided to open up the process, and so people could apply for this group. And I'm not sure what the rationale is, and I have my doubts about, I mean, they sign a contract where they say, okay, I kind of refrain from my interests in sense of, so when I give advice to, I mean, to the Commission, which is kind of, yeah, so there were, of course, discussions when you, like, will I stay? I mean, based on this new list, and I thought, well, a colleague refrained, actually, I mean.
One digital market, emphasis on market.
Yes.
The European initiative on market.
it loud enough? Yeah, right.
It's for the recording. The problem is, if you look at the European initiative, they want to create one single digital market. Yes. So emphasis on market. I hope this will be registered. So and so it's not surprising that Elsevier and other multinationals are in there. So I don't know. In fact, they're kind of exploiting researchers' energies and your energy to come up with a researcher-oriented database repository, but at the same time, where this is economically interesting, this will be exploited again for commercial purposes. So I think that's where Europe should come in. There should be perhaps the open access and the CC license, but excluding commercial use. Excluding commercial use. No? Okay, then not.
No.
Why not?
It's the opposite.
You should, if you want to disseminate, you have to disseminate everywhere. And though I like very much her point, CC0 or CCBY, full stop.
Yep.
But what we should not let publishers or private interests getting to public institution, and we should go, the kind of ultimate goal for me is to go to the creation of knowledge commons with the status where it's shared by everyone but owned by no one. That's where we should go. And we don't want to put publisher out of business. We want them as service provider
yeah.
and no more content
Yeah.
owner.
No
They
content
should not
owner.
own journals. They should not own platforms. They should not own, because now
Data,
they control
whatever.
everything. They should not own data, of
Yep.
course. Now they have a full control, and we have let that going. And in a certain sense, the European Commission, because it's not yet a democratic institution, more the Parliament will be the right place to have this debate strongly. And they try to do their best, but in practice they do really nasty things due to the lobbying of publishers, which is absolutely fantastic at the Commission. Those people are professionals, they are great, and they have succeeded to control a lot of things internal to the Commission. I'm not talking about lobbying and just meeting people. No, I'm saying being inside the Commission. And I can give example of what I'm saying.
COAR, the Confederation of Open Repositories, has a plan to propose a distributed repository infrastructure. This is perhaps a good idea. This is distributed, so non-centralized, yes. Thank you very much for this very interesting debate.